The planet is burning, and we are not doing nearly enough to bring the energy sector up to speed when it comes to renewable energy, transitioning away from fossil fuels and carbon emitting energy sources. And we're also not investing in the necessary infrastructure to protect us from pending climate disasters. Our kids are inheriting a world that is quite literally burning. And today we're joined with one of those kids who is doing something about it. Ajani Stella joins us today, who's the president of Kids Fight Climate Change. Thank you so much for coming on. Ajani, why don't you introduce your work and tell us why you started this organization?
Thanks so much for having me on here, Jessica. It's really an honor to be here with you guys. So as you mentioned, my organization is called Kids Fight Climate Change. And what we're doing is we're a youth-led climate education organization. So we're focusing on helping young people learn about the climate crisis in a way that's simple, understandable, and accessible. So I founded Kids Fight Climate Change because I noticed there's a significant lack in climate education for young people, especially when information is centered on older students or adults. It focuses more on the technical scientific aspects, and it's hard to find it scattered across the internet. So what I'm really trying to do, and my team is trying to do, is synthesize information, produce articles that we know can relate to students and relate to young people, and then have that on our website, and then go into classrooms to help teach them, to encourage kids to the site to learn on their own, and to really try to create a collaborative process with young people rather than the lecture-based scientific aspect that's often found in climate conversations.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you became aware of the climate crisis? You're 16 years old. This is a huge thing to take on, to educate your generation, younger generations about climate change. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so my climate career, if you will, really started in 5th grade with my science teacher, Vicky Sando, who actually sits on my board of directors now. And she was really engaged in talking to us about this simple stuff about climate change, the greenhouse effect, how it's going to impact our lives, biodiversity. I was lucky enough in my elementary school to have a green roof on top of our building. And as a result, I found a new appreciation for nature. And Miss Vicky was able to help foster that connection. And because of that education that I received, I actually got my first speaking opportunity in 5th grade. And that was when I spoke to the New York City Teachers Pension Fund Board of Directors, the group that handles all of the retirement money, investing all the retirement money for public school teachers in the city, urging them to divest all their funds from fossil fuels. And 2 years later, the campaign was successful, but that speech to them in the financial district downtown on the 44th floor of the tall building really jump-started my career right there.
So in November 2021, all of this work took you to attend COP26, which is the United Nations. It's the big global climate conference. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like being there, what you learned, or rather what you taught them?
At COP26, it was a really interesting experience for me because I went in there with an interesting combination of hope and cynicism. So obviously, I understand the dismay that comes from climate activists all around, and the dismay that I feel where climate conferences are not doing nearly enough. Right? We're seeing that was the 26th United Nations conference. We saw Paris, but we saw no follow through. We have all of these agreements, but there's no implementation. So it can feel really frustrating. But the other side of that is at COP, there in 2021, there were about 10,000 delegates from countries. Then there were 30,000 delegates from nonprofits, from the private sector, from other groups that are really actually genuinely engaged in climate action. And those are the people that are pushing the needle, that are really forcing governments to take action. So being on the other side of the curtain and seeing how it's all done, seeing how the sausage is made is really interesting to me, because a lot of what the public sees about COP26, about COPs in general, is not what is actually happening. The meetings that are on TV, that are publicized, where we don't see anything getting done, that's not what's going on. we're seeing delegates go into back rooms, sneak into other offices for coffee, and that's where all the agreements are hammered out. At the COP in 2022 in last November in Egypt, I wasn't there, but I was reading a story about how the delegates literally stayed overnight. The last night, they didn't go to sleep. They were strewn all over the conference center, hammering out the last few measures of this deal. So it's really showing me that there are people that actually do care, even in the high levels of government. So it is still really inspiring to witness that at the same time as we continue to push for more action.
So there's a lot of backroom deals, but some of those backroom deals are rooted in heart and pure intentions.
Exactly.
That's definitely the perfect blend of cynicism and having a positive outlook. I want to talk a little bit about inequality, because we know that climate disasters will disproportionately affect communities of color and low-income communities that are just like living in houses that are susceptible to climate disasters. These are people who struggle to afford home insurance, but maybe live super close to a coastline. And we know that these are usually communities that don't receive as much public funding. And it's also the case that there are disparities in terms of economic inequality when it comes to the quality of education you can get about climate change. Can you speak a little bit to that? I know it's one of the reasons you founded this organization.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of strides recently in climate education across the country. In earlier this year, New Jersey mandated climate education, and Connecticut just a couple of weeks ago did. But by and large, climate education is still very much teacher by teacher, school by school. What we're seeing is that teachers that have the resources, that have the knowledge, and that have the time are able to invest that into climate education. And that's why I was able to receive climate education as an elementary schooler. It's in a lot of the schools I work with. It's because they have the extra time and resources to be able to bring in activists and experts. But a lot of underprivileged schools don't get that. So what we're seeing, what you were kind of alluding to, is the cyclical effect. Not only are these communities disinvested and disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, but then they're not receiving the education and the training, the tools that they need to advocate for themselves in the future. Because for me, that's what climate education is all about. We need to learn about the science. Everyone needs to understand climate change is happening, but we can use that as a conduit for action. And if we don't have that in these essential communities, then we're going to keep perpetuating these effects in the future.
Can you say more about why you find it's important for kids fighting climate change to be youth-led and youth-focused rather than bringing in people who are much older than you all?
Yeah, so I've actually received a lot of feedback about this throughout all of the school talks that I've done and through the workshops that I've run. And it's really great to see that kids actually relate to other kids. We bring in adults, we bring in experts, they talk for an hour, they answer questions. Kids get bored. Like, we can pretend like we're interested, and oftentimes we actually are, but by and large, adults do not know how to talk to kids. Meanwhile, I go in there, I'm 16, I'm speaking to 8-year-olds, to other 16-year-olds, any youth, and they're able to see that guy is actually just like me. He started his activism when he was 10. He talks like me. He's just as short as me. I'm very short. And we're able to form some sort of connection in just those 40 minutes. And because of that, kids are actually listening. They're picking up. They're realizing we can do this. It's a big part of why I start every speech that I do with a conversation about my own story as an activist. Because in order to effectively have climate conversations and climate education, we need to humanize that process. Otherwise, we're risking just talking to a wall, basically, because we're not able to really get in and have these kids understand us. So having that youth connection is really key.
And this is really serious work to be doing. I mean, the fate of the world is in our hands, and a lot of people say, well, you're so young. Why are you doing such serious work? Oftentimes the response I give is our generation doesn't have much of a choice. It's really about survival. And it sounds like you all have stepped up to the plate when it comes to that. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because this is very serious work to be doing as a 16-year-old.
It definitely is very serious work, but like you're saying, we're living in a very serious time. I think that definitely, if I was born just a few years ago, I don't think I'd be as involved, as passionate. I like to say the one good thing that we can get out of the Trump presidency is that it inspired a whole new wave of activism because of all the horrible things that he did. And it showed me from a young age that politics really does matter, and that we each have a voice. And because of that, I was able to get involved from since 2017. I saw the impact that we all have, and I was able to master my own voice and really go into that conversation. So I was, it's essential for me as a young person and for everyone around me to have that experience.
I really appreciate that the key component here for you is to educate this generation, the young generation. I always said with organizing, it's 3 steps: 1, educate; 2, agitate; 3, organize. Can you just say more about taking action? Because you've successfully led charges to inspire entire boards to divest from fossil fuels. Can you say more about the education to organization pipeline, getting people to take action?
Yeah, so what I'm really looking towards is using education to inspire. So these kids, maybe they've heard about climate change before. They know a bit about the basics. They know it's a problem, but they see it as an issue that only the high levels of government can solve. I feel that my job as a youth climate educator is to really dispel that notion and show people that they actually do have a voice. That's why I was saying I start with my story. I talk about other activists. I talk about what we can do. And I really try to make any conversation, any lecture I have an interactive and engaging experience, because then it starts to open up those gears in their mind. Everything starts turning. They start figuring out, oh, I actually do have ideas. I have a way that I can help solve this problem and help find a solution. And from that, through those baby steps, we're able to get them into that, as you put it, education to organization to action pipeline.
Thank you so much for talking with us, Ajani. The planet's in good hands and the kids are all right with you. Can you tell people where to find your work and Kids Fight Climate Change's work?
Sure, thank you. If you look up kidsfightclimatechange.org or just Google the organization, it's the first hit. Our website is an online repository of educational information, and you can click the button to contribute or to volunteer.
Awesome. Thank you so much for talking with us tonight.
Thanks so much, Jessica.